Thick layers of dust leave stark impressions along the crumbling stonework as you descend into the burial chamber. The only life apparent here is the lichen which clings to the cracks that run through several pale frescoes. Here you can sense the presence of death all around you as a monument to the temporal. Here, it is easy to forget the sun altogether, in this place where bones crumble to meal and rot counts the decades. What's going on, folks? Ted from Nerd Immersion here, and as we continue on through our ever-long list of Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft coverage, it is a Tuesday, so it's time for a top 10 video. There are 22 what they're called other domains of dread, which basically just provide one to a couple of paragraphs about them, but no real explanation of building this out in any way. I'm going to give you my top 10 domains that I wish we had more on. Right, we got our handful of domains that were spelled out or built out a little bit more. For example, like Markovia, where they give you a little bit more information, a couple adventure seeds and things like that. But I thought, let's talk about the ones that we only got a little bit that I'd like to see a lot. So I picked out 10. Again, that leaves 12 on the cutting room floor for this video. And they cover a variety of different types of adventures and different types of settings and types of horror. So I thought it would be cool to talk about them and then give you a little bit as to why I think I'd like to see more about them. Before we dive into that, though, as you probably guessed by my little intro there, I wanted to talk to you about Describe, the sponsor for this video. As you can see, this is the creepy crypt dialogue that I just read through. So Describe is an online tool that you can use to develop interesting and immersive box text for your campaigns. And when I say develop, I mean pull from a list of over 500 plus scenes developed by a team of excellent and descriptive writers to cover a variety of different things like magic items, spells, specifics. There's even one that I found that was really interesting recently that was for a description of copying as a wizard, copying a spell from a scroll into your spell book. There's descriptive text for that, and I thought that was pretty unique. And hey, player character stuff is coming in the future, and the scenes are constantly evolving. So there's a link in the description where you can use the coupon code NERDIMMERSION to get yourself 10% off the first purchase that you have, and then, you know, figure out what makes the most sense for you, whether that's monthly, annually, and what pieces you want. Thank you, Describe, for sponsoring this video. Let's get on to number 10. Number 10. Cyre 1313, the Mourning Rail. I covered this in the past. Yes, this is an Eberron-based domain of dread, and I think part of the reason that I want more expanse on this is because it's Eberron. It's legitimate Eberron content found in another book that wasn't the Eberron Rising from the Last War. So it's also interesting. I kind of get it's basically the domain is a train, and it is the lightning rail, the Mourning Rail, as you can see here, this sort of necrotic looking train with the spirits on it. The story goes basically, sorry about that. The story goes basically that as the Mourning, the massive event that was going to kill all the folks, most of the folks in Cyre around Eberron was coming, everybody wanted to board a train to leave. The trains are called the Lightning Rail in Eberron, and basically some hoity-toity noble said, no, you gotta wait for me to get on, and pushed a whole bunch of people out, and then you had to bring in all of his stuff, and because everyone waited for that VIP, they were caught by the Mourning. They weren't able to escape, and as such, this domain is now sort of a traveling, hurtling, moving domain, which is weird to me, of this train traveling through the mists. And I think it's interesting too because it says somewhere in here, you know, the passenger, those on board fear the disaster that's pursuing them, meaning the Mourning, not knowing that they're already dead. And then there's this mysterious passenger who is the VIP up at the front. And then necrotic energy is what's fueling this, you know, spectral locomotive as it moves through the mists. I think that's pretty cool. And it sounds like it could be its own adventure, like a whole adventure could be based around this. Or at least, you know, an expanded information about the characters. Who is the VIP? I realize that leaves the option up to the DM, but I'd like to know. Number 9. Odaire. And as you can see, compared to what we just had, this is the entirety of the section for Odaire, so it's not a lot of information. But basically, this is the creepy evil toy village, right, as it were. So it's like a Pinocchio-style story. The toy maker, Giuseppe, wanted a family. He made a puppet child that was named a marionette named Figlio, who was basically your Pinocchio story. The children of the village loved Figlio. The parents questioned whether he was a real boy or not. This led Giuseppe to become jealous and made a whole bunch of siblings for him. All of his creations killed all the adults in the village, and now it's basically populated only by children and ruled over by Figlio, who is a carionette, which is a creature we'll cover whenever I do my new monsters in Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft. But yeah, it's a spooky evil toy thing. You could possibly tie this into other campaigns. You could maybe mess around with Blinsky and Curse of Strahd if you wanted to go that route and have spooky toys there. But, you know, the idea of evil toys, and it's a child-filled village, so it doesn't necessarily have to be Children of the Corn based, but it would definitely be a spooky time, and I think this one could have warranted a little bit of an expansion to be its own full, fleshed-out Domain of Dread. Number 8. The Nightmare Lands. So this is basically an entire area formed from the nightmares of one individual, and it's basically this weird sleep realm, but there are also some interesting, unique characters tied to it. So it says, those who visit the Nightmare Lands speak of malicious wilderness, the empty city called Nod, which I think is an interesting, clever play on words. The city is Nod, and it's a dreamland, so that's pretty clever. Drifting spheres. Basically, you can kind of see it here, but it says uncounting drifting spheres, each containing a stranger's unending nightmare. So if you think about you're traveling through a city, you could basically see all the bubbles of everyone's individual nightmares. And it says none know how many members compose this nightmare court of people who rule over it, but they have some specific ones. The Ghost Dancer, which you can kind of see displayed in this art here. The Tomb-bound Hypnos, the Witch Malunga, the Trickster Morpheus, and the embodiment of terror known as the Nightmare Man. So some of those we know from, from different mythology, right? Morpheus, I think, is either Greek or Roman. Hypnos, I'm not sure what mythology they're from. The Nightmare Man reminds me kind of like a Slender Man. Don't know if that's the intention, but that's what I get from it. It says they're artisans of nightmares, and it's interesting that they're all living nightmares of Carolyn Dinwiddie, I don't know the story behind that character, but I would love to know more, right? A potent psychic who repressed memories of her own heartless deeds, and she's basically dreamed an entire realm into existence. It's deep in the city of Nod, inside a warped reimagining of the clinic where she once worked. Dinwiddie sleeps without waking, refusing to face the terrors of her dreams unleashed upon innocents across the multiverse. So the Nightmare Land sounds like it doesn't necessarily... It is a domain, but it could be anywhere, and it could find its way into any specific scenario. So that is interesting, especially if your characters have established fears or nightmares that they deal with. Then this could be an opportunity for you to segue into this, and it could drop into any campaign, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be a specifically Domain of Dread campaign. This could be like a regular whatever Storm King's Thunder, and then somebody has a bad dream, and now all of a sudden you're dealing with the Nightmare Lands, which could be an interesting way to divert from the standard plot, switch things up a little bit, do a Halloween-style kind of one-shot. Again, I think there's a lot to be explored here, and it's kind of unfortunate that this is all we got. Number 7. Tovag. This is the domain of Cass the Bloody-Handed, the once general and champion of the Lich Vecna, who is a vampire and turned against Vecna and now seeks to destroy Vecna. So again, this could have been developed into a whole campaign. There were several campaigns in D&D history about Vecna. This is obviously Cass's domain, a little bit different than Vecna, but obviously tied to it. And again, I think Vecna has his own domain, but I can't remember the name of it, and I don't believe it's one that's listed here. It might be, and I just missed it. But either way, I always thought Cass was more interesting personally than Vecna because it's a Death Knight, and the Sword of Cass I thought was a pretty badass magic item, and it kind of describes that at the end here. Invariably, he sends his troops off into the mist to, thinking that Vecna's realm is just beyond his realm. And his troops never return, which causes him to rebuild his forces, and continue this over and over, searching for the Sword of Cass, which will, if you know anything about it, has the potential to destroy the various kind of relics of Vecna. So, again, I think a lot of folks would like to see this one because they have a lot of love for Vecna and the history there. This was like a nice little teaser. But realistically, there's not a lot. If you are going to like try to build this out into your own domain of dread and its own campaign, this is not a lot to go off of. Number 6. I think it's Niranjan. I don't know how you pronounce it, and there's a lot of words in this particular section that I can't pronounce. But what I thought was interesting is this is, it looks like it's basically like a monastery, so traditional like ascetic monastery. It says there are a bunch of scholars and they attach, non-attachment to the material. So I guess a more a potential traditional or stereotypical in some ways kind of, monk monastery, where folks go there and they sort of relinquish their material possessions to pursue enlightenment or further discipline or things like that. And it says now it's basically just a few scholars and their holy figure, Niranjan, who's actually a bronze dragon, but like an evil bronze dragon, or at least they call him wicked here, who sends agents into the mists bearing his philosophical writings, and they promise escape and peace to anybody who comes and joins the monastery. And then they basically bring and divest themselves of all of their, worldly, monetary, material goods, which this dragon then adds to its own hoard. So it's kind of self-serving. And then it helps claim the victims, puts them in a trance, and causes their souls to slip away from their body. And then it basically replaces their soul with a shadow, as in like the shadow creature in the monster manual, leaving the victim under their control. So I thought this was really interesting because it's like it sounds like almost like an evil metallic dragon who has created or taken over in a domain to just convince people to give them all of their money and their stuff, and then basically brainwashes and controls them, and then continues to do this to just grow and grow and grow. This, I think, could be a really interesting concept for a campaign where someone, a family member joins this monastery, and then the sibling knows something is up, whether the sibling's your character or otherwise, and you're like, we got to figure out what's going on. I know something's not right. I know it's not what it seems. And then it's trying to track this down and then uncover Sarthak's whole plan, eventually defeat them, and then figure out what happens from there. Sounds really interesting. Again, sounds like a great seed for a whole campaign. But again, one paragraph. Number 5. Keening. Keening is a really interesting domain in that everyone in the village is deaf, but they're all deaf by choice because of the ever-present banshee who stalks the whole town and the area every night. So everyone has purposefully deafened themselves to be safe from the banshee's wail. And I think that this is really interesting. I'd like to know more about what it went into this whole story and the process of how these people go about, living their lives like this. And, what's the deal with this banshee and then like, there's also the moral kind of quandary of like, if you manage to defeat the banshee, then everybody in the town has deafened themselves for nothing once the banshee is defeated. And that leaves like a potential, how do we handle this scenario? And I think it could be definitely an interesting dilemma for players. Again, this one to me doesn't really sound like it's enough to build out an entire campaign in there. But that's also because it's one of the shortest paragraphs in this book about a whole domain. So part of me is just like, maybe you shouldn't have even included it and then expanded something else a little bit further, or show me and explain to me more so why this is worth including in the book. Number 4. Markovia. Once again, another exceptionally short domain description for something that is immensely interesting and people have expressed a lot of interest in. It is basically the island of Dr. Moreau scenario here. František Markov is a scientific and experimental genius. He has a formula that grants him ridiculous intellect, but it kind of takes away and kind of makes you more bestial. So there's almost like a Jekyll Hyde aspect to that. But he fled to this tropical island of Markovia, and he tests new version on this formula on the local creatures around. And as a result of these tests, the animals now possess sapience and have deluded into believing that Markov is their god. So now it's an island full of sapient animals that worship this crazy mad scientist as a god. And I think that that's amazing. Like, there's so much potential there. What if some of the animals are escaping the island and they make their way to the mainland? How do you deal with that? And then you have to go sort this out. Again, it's a domain of dread, I guess, by its own description. So like you have to find yourself in that specific domain through the mists to then encounter with it. But to me, it sounds like that could be almost more just like an interesting island that you put anywhere in any other existing realm. But I think I remember during the live stream I did, a lot of people were asking about Markovia to get more information about it. And I said, it's like 4 sentences. I can't give you more. That's all we got. And that seemed to disappoint a lot of people, which makes me think that in the past it had a lot more going for it. And there was a lot more to develop out into a full, whether it be a mini campaign, several, instances of one-shots or whatnot. I'm curious. I want to know more. Number 3. I'm going to call it the Vhage Agency. I don't know how you're supposed to pronounce that, but I like it because it's a film noir detective story in a domain. Because everything in there, everything inside the office is a monotone gray. So it's all got the black and white vibe already going. So it says anyone that passes through, which I thought is the most interesting, the frosted glass door that leads into this single room domain. So the whole domain is a room. It sounds like basically, if any kind of noir detective story where there's the glass kind of door with it says like Vhage Agency on the front, you walk inside. It sounds like you're basically in the mists till you find this door, and then you walk inside, and now you're in this detective story. You're all expected by the Dark Lord, who is Felmira Vhage, the agency, the PI who owns the agency. And it says, from this hub for occult detective adventures, which, again, it's basically send you out, your Columbo, whatever kind of style adventure you're on, Dresden Files. She collects mysterious correspondence relating to mysteries across all of the domains of dread. She enlists agents to investigate the cases, report back. She never reveals her own dark past as a detective turned criminal, and her involvement in every case her agency investigates, or that the Vhage Agency exists entirely within her mind. So there's a lot to unpack there, but this could potentially be your hub, if you wanted it to be, your hub access to every other domain of dread. And it's, you go to the agency and, you can, if you love that kind of stuff like I do, you can play out the scene with the old-timey music and the rain and the thunder, and you pull out your transatlantic accent and talk through how this is going to go. And this could be your central hub for how you gain access to all the other domains of dread. I got a mystery here over in the unsolved case in the land of Barovia, and we'll take you over there, and you can see what you can find out about this guy named Blinsky. And over here in this thing, it's called, some sort of train, a locomotive. We got something going on over here, something with ghosts. I don't know. You'll figure it out. And you send people out on these things, and you could be like, we can go to Barovia today. We could go to Eberron in the morning rail tomorrow. We could go to the island of Dr. Moreau style Markovia in this one. And I think this probably has some of the most potential, because I love that it's a whole domain of dread that is a room. But that's all we have is these 4 or 5 sentences. This could be a campaign. We could call it Vhage Agency. That's the name of the book. And it's a whole domain, a whole campaign where you just dip your toe into all the domains of dread. And I think that would be amazing, because it'd get you a little taste of each. It might be a little too much to pack into one book, but I think there's definitely something there worth exploring. Number 2. The Rider's Bridge. This is a Headless Horseman, basically, domain. If you're familiar with the tale of the traditional Headless Horseman, right, with Ichabod Crane and all of that stuff, I obviously am. I live in New York. I live not too very far away from Sleepy Hollow, where this actually supposedly all happened. So as a kid growing up, Halloween, and being a fan of all that kind of stuff, knowing people that were the descendants of the actual Van Tassels in the Headless Horseman story, like, this is something that's steeped in your culture when you live around here, just how it is, right? But the story is, you're trying to, he escapes, but you got to cross the bridge, right? That's the whole thing. Cross the Rider's Bridge, and the Headless Horseman can't follow you. And typically, in like most of the things, it's where they throw the pumpkin head at you when you're crossing the bridge, because they can't follow along. And that's basically what this story is. So, and there's actually a couple interesting things. It's basically everybody has a story about the Headless Rider of some kind. They list a couple out here. And it says, but whatever the case may be, the rider's missing their head. It appears upon a prominent bridge, and it decapitates victims as it endlessly searches for its own head. should, and I like this part the most, should someone escape an encounter with a headless rider, they might find a different domain on the opposite side of the bridge. So you're running from they have a Dullahan here, and again, I would recommend checking out the Johnny Depp, I think it was Johnny Depp, Christina Ricci, Sleepy Hollow movie. They dive more into the Dullahan aspect of that, you know, kind of the German soldier, blah, 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 all that thing. But the Dullahan creature in here is amazing. Again, I'll see that when I cover the monsters in the future thing. But you escape across the Rider's Bridge to get past away from it, and now you find yourself in another domain, potentially worse off than you were before you left, right? You travel across the bridge and now you're in like Barovia or something like that. That could be pretty messed up. But I like this, and I don't know, I think what I'm learning about myself as I do this, I enjoy the domains that are kind of goofy, like, not goofy, I guess that's the wrong word, but the Mourning Rail is a whole domain, but it's a train. The Vhage Agency is a room. This is a bridge. These are domains, but they're not like a full fleshed out area like Barovia or, you know, Lamordia or any of these other ones. It's just like, this is a room, this one's a bridge, this one's a train. I don't know. I really like it. I think there's a lot of fun things you could do. Maybe 2 different domains of dread are connected by the bridge, which is its own 3rd domain. I don't know. This doesn't really come across to me as a domain of dread, though, which is part of the problem that I have, because it's just a bridge, but they don't really give you too much about the bridge itself. So again, more information would be appreciated. Number 1. I think it's pronounced Risibilos, but basically it is, I put this one here as number 1 because it's hilarious and I love it. So it is a music hall found in a city. The lord is, I think, Doardon. He was a king with no sense of humor, and basically if he heard anybody laughing, he murdered them. It was worth, you know, laughter had the penalty of death, basically. Now he's cursed to entertain people, which is obviously something he's not very good at, but the Mists gave him a partner, and this is the best part, a ventriloquist dummy carved in the likeness of Strahd von Zarovich, which has a mind of its own and thinks that it is the real Strahd, and the one sitting on the throne in Castle Ravenloft is an imposter. And he will take audiences and makes all sorts of crazy promises to anyone who promises to help him regain his station as the true lord of Barovia. Now, I got to imagine this is an attempt to bring Mr. Shambleface, the sort of loved puppet of the Dice Camera Action live stream run by Chris Perkins. There was a puppet, like a hand kind of doll made in the likeness of Strahd von Zarovich that they called Mr. Shambleface. And I think that's where I'm getting of very Mr. Shambleface vibes from this. And it says, this kind of puppet of Strahd telling everybody, I'm the real Strahd, which I imagine he will talk 100% like the Count from Sesame Street, because he's a puppet. So, I mean, it's the closest thing you're going to get to a Muppet, right? But it's hilarious to anyone who thinks the slightest inkling who knows who Strahd is, right? If you don't know who Strahd is, it doesn't matter. But if you do, and this puppet's like, blah, I will take back Barovia, I'm the true Strahd. And you're like, okay, whatever. You start laughing. That is apparently, peals of laughter, it says, are agony to Doardon's ears. Remember, this is the guy who murdered people for laughing. And now he's put in an area where he's entertaining people, and his partner is a dummy that looks like the Count Strahd von Zarovich telling people, I'm the real guy, put me back in power, making them laugh and making him suffer, which again is very Mist-driven Domain of Dread style stuff. I would like to go there just to meet dummy Strahd von Zarovich, and then realistically, because it's me, I would love to take him with me to Barovia and watch the showdown between whichever one is the real Strahd. I don't know, the dummy could be Strahd, who knows. But anyway, thank you all so much for watching. Thank you to my wife for interrupting my video, as she always does. Thank you once again to Describe for sponsoring this video. And let me know what your thoughts are on these. Is there any Domain of Dread that you would like to see more information on in the future? Or was there one that's missing from this list or the main list that you think should be included? Let me know. And thank you again to my patrons over on Patreon for continuing to support me and the channel. And I will see you all next time.